This series is called Moving from Control to Communication. As you know, most of our parenting adult coffees are on a specific topic. So we do them on mental health or drugs and alcohol, stress, social media, sexuality, and gender identity. And at those coffees, people come together and we share our concerns. But like any Speak Up program, our goal is that you leave that parenting adult coffee knowing that you're not alone in your feelings and experiences, that you're more willing to ask for help. And what that means for us is often just talking to one of our friends about what's going on in our lives, or a sibling or another person, one of our people. And that you also know that there are things we can do as adults that will make it more likely that our young people talk to us. And so what are those things? And that's what we want to focus on today. So in this two-part series, we're going to share the Speak Up mindset and skill set that we've developed listening to young people and families over more than 20 years. Okay, so the Speak Up skill set has 6 steps. The first one is to orient to the mindset. The second one is to start the conversation. And the third one is to listen with empathy. The fourth one is to support our young people in problem solving. The fifth one is encouraging help seeking and self-care. And the sixth one is to check in and continue the conversation. Today, we're going to cover the first 3, orienting to the mindset, starting the conversation, and listening with empathy. And next week, we're going to cover the next 3. So we are going to start with the mindset. The Speak Up mindset. So we use the acronym Speak Up. S is to start with students and their strengths, and I'm going to come back to that one in detail. The P is to see teens as problem solvers, not problems to be solved. The E is everyone is in it together, the youth, the educators, and the parenting adults. The A is that it's all about the relationships. The K is knowing that you do not have to be the solution. One of the things that gets in the way often of us wanting to help our young people or to have tough conversations is thinking that we need to know the answers. U is that the universal solution begins by speaking up. And what's so important about that, and the reason we focus on it, is no matter what the problem is, whether it's drugs and alcohol, stress, social media, whatever it is, whenever you look at how do you approach this problem, the first step that you'll always see is to talk about it, to speak up and ask for help. And we talk about that as the master key for young people, because it works no matter what the problem is, big or small, now or in the future. And the P is it's personal. Be your authentic self as a parent. Admit that you haven't done it perfectly. Share your worries and concerns. Be in conversation with your young people. So when we say start with their strengths, Speak Up is a strength-based program. And what that means, we're part of this group across the country, actually, that's trying to change the way we view young people. Because so often you'll see, the headlines of the magazines or the news stories, or even in conversation, when people talk about teenagers, they talk about surviving the teen years, or they roll their eyes, or so much of the narrative around young people is negative. But really, this is an amazing generation. You hear my mom say that all the time. And that's always everybody's biggest takeaway from Speak Up. Well, I cannot tell you how often the words "I was blown away by the young people" are on the surveys coming out of the Speak Up event. In fact, after a Speak Up event, 97% of adults say they have a more positive view of young people. And that's important because we want you to think about that. We want you to focus on your young people's strengths and to be blown away by them, by listening to them and talking with them. And when we focus on strengths, we strengthen our young people. I'm going to say that again. When we focus on their strengths, we actually strengthen them to handle the challenges that come their way. Because when we direct them to focus on their greatest assets, then they know to use those to address any challenges that they might face. And focusing on strengths isn't Pollyanna or ignoring risky behavior, because the research is really clear that when you focus on young people's strengths, and honestly our own strengths, what happens is you have a chance to thrive and you can use those strengths to address any deficits that you might have. And this is really important because most of us tend to focus on our deficits. And I know that I often will say, if I can share what young people say, when they say it in their words, it really emblazons in my mind and makes me want to do better. And so in the words of young people, the student said, I just want to be acknowledged for something I've done right, rather than what I haven't done or what I've done wrong. And they also say that when you trust us, we trust ourselves. So really, I want to encourage you to talk with your students, I mean, your young people, your children, teenagers, about their strengths. Ask them what they think their top 3 strengths are. The second main point is that it's all about relationships. And I want to focus on this because, often we communicate in ways that damage our relationship. And when we talk about it's all about relationships, we call it being in right relationship. And what that means, like the video, that students or our kids, our teenagers, they are in the leading role of their lives. And we're in the supporting role. And so if we can remember that, being the consultant is their head, we're side by side, but a few steps behind. Steve Treat, who was the chair of our board and a renowned counselor, when we had our transition to college program, he said something that really stuck with me on this. He said, parents, if you insist on staying in the parent role, you trap your kids in the kid role. And he talked about like stepping stones on a path. And he said, if you're on the step right in front of them, they can't go there. And so that's really helpful in terms of thinking about when we act in that control way, when we act as we're the leaders, when we don't put them in the leading role, we are really not being helpful to them for the long term. The Search Institute, another youth organization that has done the most research on developmental relationships and what works best in those key relationships between young people and adults, they call that sharing power. And it's the most difficult of the aspects of those kind of relationships is to share power. We call it the level playing field. And what we say is, since it's so hard to do, just start with being equals with them in the conversation. Really giving them equal voice, starting with what is on their mind, let them talk, listen. So be equals in the conversation. Don't assume that we have to be the experts or know all the answers. And being in right relationship is so important because not only does it let young people make their own decisions and therefore mistakes, but more importantly, it lets them own the successes. And that's so important because they get the self-esteem, they get the self-confidence that comes from when it goes right, and they get to have that success. That takes me to my next point, which is, we talked about first step is orienting to the mindset. The second step is about starting the conversation. And when we talk about starting the conversation, one of the things we often overlook is to set the stage. So think about just being in the same space at the same time and being present. And then timing, think about the timing. So this is something that I often mess up, is, young people, they like to talk late at night. I know that sometimes as parents, we like to give them lots of direction early in the morning. Not a great strategy. Some young people like to talk in the car, but it's not one size fits all. So in one of our speak ups, we were saying, yeah, it's great to talk to your kids in the car. And students were saying, oh, we hate that. We feel like a car hostage. So it doesn't work for all kids, but you know what, you can ask your child, you can say to them like, hey, there's something I want to talk to you about. Is now a good time? And again, that's just treating them with respect, like they're an equal in the conversation. And the other thing I want to say about starting the conversation is to consider, is it one-on-one or two-on-one? I know for me that I always assumed that if I wanted to send my kids the message that this was a really important conversation, then my husband and I, we would sit down with them together. It would be this idea of like united front. And this is so important that we're both making time to come with you together. And I remember Ken Ginsberg, who's one of our experts that we have access to, he talked about, you know what, that's not always the best strategy. You know, they can feel ganged up on. Maybe it's better to start one-on-one and just lay the groundwork that as a couple, as partners, as adults who, you know, two parenting adults, that you're going to share the conversation, that you talk with each other, but that it doesn't always have to be two-on-one. The next part about starting the conversation is what they call be calm and show a non-anxious presence. And this is hard, like breathe, try not to react. That can be really hard for me. It's really hard for me if I'm scared. So like it's 1 o'clock in the morning, my child's not home, I go right to fear. And when I talk to them, I'm like screaming crazy person. And I know my mom always used to use the expression, fear stops communication with the people you love the most. And I didn't actually get it at first, but I get it now as the mom of 4 boys who have gone through the teenage years. Like when I'm afraid, I communicate in ways that damage my relationship. And that makes it less likely that they're going to come to us the next time. Because one of the things that we found at Speak Up that is so, so true is that whether you know this or not, every young person, they really do not want to disappoint their parents. They do not want to burden you. They do not want to worry you. They say things like, I'm so depressed. And when the parents say, have you told your parents? They say things like, no. Oh, my mom's dad is dying and I don't want to worry her. Oh, my dad lost his job, or, you know, this is going on, that's going on. They're really much kinder than they get credit for. And so if you just know that they don't want to burden you, they don't want to disappoint you, when they come to us and we freak out, or we get upset, or like they are probably going to have a reluctance to bring us their next hard truth. And so be the most calm person in the system if you can. I like to remember that stress is contagious, but so is calm. And you know, when your kids were little and they were crying and you'd put them up against your chest and you'd hold them and you'd breathe slowly so that they would calm down. Think about this as like the teenage version of that. And then I would say to remember that when you mess up, apologize. Say to them like, I'm sorry I got so worked up. You know, I was scared for a moment. I'm not at my best self then. I didn't want to handle it that way. And I'm going to try not to do that again. Be more aware of it. The third point is to listen with empathy. And when we talk about empathy, empathy is a way of connecting with other people's emotion. And it shows that what they're experiencing is something meaningful, but it doesn't require that we've experienced the same situation or that we know exactly what they're going through. And empathy is one of the key elements in building a relationship. Thanks, Erica, for jumping in there on that. We're going to share with you a slide called Empathy Blockers. And I love this because you may have gotten this as one of our appeals that we send out. But basically, it tells us there are certain things we do. One of the common parenting adult responses, said with the best of intentions, can unknowingly shut down conversation and cause disconnect. And we have suggestions for better ways to listen and communicate with empathy and continue the conversation. So one of our mantras at Speak Up is to grab the low-hanging fruit. And the low-hanging fruit is just to don't do these things, you know? We know, like, try not to scream, but under this one, we have things we want to avoid. So when your young person comes to you and might say, hey, I had a rough day, you know, avoid these things. The one-up response. You think your day was rough, let me tell you about mine. The advise or fix. Maybe if you got off your phone at night and got some more sleep, you wouldn't have had a rough day. The educate approach. I do this a lot. You know, I was listening to this audio book, or in my case, I heard from these kids at Speak Up. Interrogate. Was it because of your test? Did you get in trouble? You know, asking a million questions. Or discounting or shutting them down. Do you know how privileged you are to get an education in the first place? This can be a really common one that we do around here. And then there's things that we can try. Let them be heard. Say, you know, I hear you. Tell me more. Or just wow. Or I don't know what to say right now, but I'm grateful that you told me. Validate their feelings. You know, it's not easy this year. Ask them the 5 best words. If you have nothing else in your arsenal, how can I be helpful? Ask your kids, you know, when they come to talk to you, do you want advice or do you just want to vent? And follow their lead. They might not want to talk right now, but they can talk at a different time. Before we move on to the discussion part, and remember your major empathy blocker, because we can use that as we get into the discussion part, I just want to do a quick reminder. Remember to be the consultant and not the manager. And if you have not been, quote, rehired as the consultant yet, think about using some of the things you've learned today and see if you can't get rehired. Focus on their strengths. Ask them what they think their strengths are. Ask them what they genuinely think about anything. Value their opinion. Ask them, who are your people? So we talk about how it's so important to have these relationships. And, you know, one of my favorite questions was, who are your people? I used to ask my 4 boys that all the time. And 4 totally different personalities, but they would always say the same 2 people. Uncle Matt, who's my twin brother, and Uncle Bill, who is Ann's husband. But them just knowing, hey, if you didn't want to talk to me or you couldn't reach me, who would you go to? And that's true for us as adults too. Think about who our people are that we can trust to talk to about things. Then I statements, not you statements. So one of the things that when you want to get into starting a conversation with them, something that's super helpful is just to say what you see. I feel concerned. Are you concerned? And genuinely ask them. And if they say no, say, would you tell me if you were? Can I ask that you would tell me if you were? And that idea of just saying what you see is a great way to enter into a conversation. Listen first and don't feel like you have to fix it.